Be me. 24, staunch feminist, used to think patriarchy is the root of all evil. Used to think universal paternity tests for newborns were a sign of distrust and patriarchal control. Used to roll my eyes at guys who worried about such things. My worldview was a perfect bubble of righteous anger and female empowerment. Until my bubble burst. Back in college, maybe 3 years ago or so, can't remember exactly when, had this tight-knit group of friends who shared all my beliefs. We were the campus feminists, the ones who organized protests and wrote angry blog posts. Isabel was the most radical of us all, always quoting feminist theory and calling out microaggressions. Brooklyn was softer, but equally committed, constantly talking about love and trust being the foundation of everything. We'd sit in coffee shops for hours, dissecting every social issue through our feminist lens. Remember thinking we had all the answers. Remember how superior we felt to those bitter men online complaining about paternity fraud. If you don't trust your partner, why are you with them? We'd say. Demanding DNA tests is just another way men try to control women's bodies and choices. We had statistics memorized about how rare paternity fraud actually was, felt so enlightened, so progressive, looked down on anyone who disagreed as either brainwashed or malicious. Around this time, my closest friend Leo started dating Scarlett. Leo wasn't part of our feminist circle, but he was sweet and genuine. Had known him since freshman year, he was one of the few guys I actually respected. Scarlett was newer to our group, met her through some mutual friends, I think. They seemed perfect together, always holding hands, finishing each other's sentences, the kind of couple that makes you believe in true love. Leo would light up whenever he talked about Scarlett. Couldn't stop gushing about how she was different from other girls he'd dated, how she was intelligent and independent and shared his dreams. They'd been together for maybe 2 years when she got pregnant, sometime in spring, though I can't pin down the exact month. When Scarlett announced the pregnancy, Leo was over the moon, started talking about baby names immediately, wanted to name the child after his grandfather if it was a boy, began saving money for a bigger apartment, talked about proposing after the baby was born, kept saying he'd never been happier in his life. All of us were thrilled for them. Isabel made jokes about Leo being a good feminist ally for being so supportive. Brooklyn kept gushing about how beautiful their family would be. Scarlett seemed happy too, though looking back, she was quieter than usual. Pregnancy symptoms, we all assumed. None of us thought anything was wrong. The baby was born sometime in early fall, I think September or October. Healthy little boy, looked just like any newborn to me. Leo was beside himself with joy at the hospital, kept taking photos and sending them to everyone. Said he'd never felt love like that before. Kept talking about teaching his son to play baseball and ride bikes. First few weeks seemed normal. Leo would bring the baby around sometimes, proudly showing him off. Always had this huge smile on his face. Would talk about sleepless nights like they were the greatest gift in the world. Scarlett seemed tired but happy enough. We all cooed over the baby like you do. Then something shifted. Maybe a month or 2 after the birth. Can't remember exactly when. Leo started seeming different. Less talkative, more withdrawn. Stopped bringing the baby around as much. When he did show up to group hangouts, he seemed distracted, kept checking his phone and leaving early. Isabel joked that he was just experiencing new parent exhaustion. Brooklyn said it was probably just the adjustment period. I started getting worried, though. Leo had always been the most reliable person I knew. Seeing him so distant felt wrong somehow. Decided to reach out and see if he wanted to grab coffee. Met him at this little place near campus on a Tuesday afternoon, I think. Or maybe it was a Wednesday. Honestly, can't recall. What I do remember is how terrible he looked. Dark circles under his eyes, hands shaking slightly. Ordered a coffee, but barely touched it. Kept staring out the window like he was somewhere else entirely. Small talk felt forced and awkward. Eventually, I asked him directly what was wrong. Told him he seemed like he hadn't been himself lately. Asked if everything was okay with the baby and Scarlett. That's when he broke down completely. Started crying right there in the coffee shop. Took him a while to compose himself enough to speak. What he told me next changed everything. Said he'd been having this nagging feeling for weeks. Couldn't explain it rationally, just something that felt off. Said the baby didn't look quite like he'd expected. Knew it was probably just new parent anxiety, but couldn't shake it. Told me he'd done something he never thought he'd do. Had secretly collected a DNA sample and sent it off for testing. Said he felt terrible about it, like he was betraying Scarlett. But the doubt was eating him alive, and he had to know. Results came back the week before our coffee meeting. The baby wasn't his. Felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. Here was my friend, devastated and broken. His whole world had crumbled in an instant. Everything he thought he knew about his life was a lie. The woman he loved had been lying to him for months. The child he'd already fallen in love with wasn't biologically his. Leo kept apologizing through his tears. Kept saying he knew he should have trusted Scarlett. Said he felt like a terrible person for doubting her. But also couldn't understand how she could let him believe the lie. Hadn't confronted her yet, didn't know how. Was terrified of losing both her and the baby he'd grown to love. Sat there listening, completely speechless. All my feminist theories and principles felt suddenly hollow. Here was real pain, real betrayal, real human suffering. Couldn't dismiss it as male insecurity or patriarchal control. This was my friend's life falling apart, and he'd done exactly what I'd always said was wrong and controlling. Tried to comfort him as best I could. Told him he had every right to know the truth. Said he wasn't a bad person for having doubts. Promised I'd be there for him no matter what happened. But inside, my whole worldview was shifting. Everything I'd believed so firmly was cracking. Leo eventually did confront Scarlett. She admitted to the affair, said she wasn't sure who the father was. Claimed she'd hoped it was Leo's and just went with it. Said she'd fallen in love with Leo during the relationship and the affair meant nothing. Begged him to stay, said they could work through it. Leo was too hurt and betrayed to continue. They broke up sometime in November, I think. Leo moved out of their shared apartment. Sometimes he sees the baby, says he can't help loving him, but knowing the truth made staying impossible. Has been in therapy, trying to work through the trauma. Says he'll never trust anyone the same way again. Watching my friend go through this completely changed my perspective. Started questioning everything I'd believed about paternity tests. Realized that maybe wanting to know wasn't about controlling women. Maybe it was about protecting everyone involved from exactly this kind of devastation. Began thinking that mandatory testing might actually be more fair. Decided to write about my changing views. Didn't use any real names or identifying details. Published a blog post about why I now supported mandatory paternity testing. Argued that truth and transparency were more important than blind trust. Said that protecting men from paternity fraud was just as important as protecting women's rights. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of shares, hundreds of comments, mix of support and outrage. Some people thanked me for speaking up. Others called me a traitor to feminism. My own friend group was not pleased. Isabel texted me first, just hours after the post went live. Said she couldn't believe I'd written something so anti-woman. Accused me of falling for red pill propaganda. Said I was promoting misogynistic talking points. Refused to listen when I tried to explain about Leo. Kept insisting that paternity fraud was statistically insignificant. Brooklyn was more diplomatic, but equally disappointed. Said she understood I was trying to help Leo, but worried I was throwing women under the bus. Kept emphasizing that relationships should be built on trust. Argued that demanding tests would damage the foundation of love. Couldn't seem to grasp that the lie had already damaged everything. Decided to bring it up at our next group meeting. Happened at our usual coffee spot, maybe a week or two later. All the usual suspects were there. Isabel, Brooklyn, and a few others. Started the conversation carefully, trying to ease into the topic. Mentioned that I'd been thinking about honesty in relationships. The moment I said DNA testing, Isabel exploded. Started yelling about how I'd been brainwashed by the manosphere. Accused me of internalized misogyny. Said I was betraying everything our friendship group stood for. Wouldn't let me get a word in edgewise about Leo's situation. Tried to explain that this wasn't theoretical anymore. Told them about what happened to Leo, though I kept details vague. Said I'd seen firsthand how devastating paternity fraud could be. Argued that preventing this kind of trauma was worth some temporary discomfort. Insisted the truth was more feminist than lies. Isabel wouldn't hear any of it. Kept shouting about patriarchal control and policing women's bodies. Said that mandating tests would be treating all women like potential cheaters. Argued that it would destroy the presumption of innocence in relationships. Claimed I was promoting rape culture by not trusting women. Brooklyn tried to be more reasonable, but disagreed entirely. Kept emphasizing that love requires trust. Said that asking for tests would poison relationships from the start. Worried about the message it would send to women. Couldn't understand why I'd changed my mind so drastically. The other friends mostly stayed quiet, but seemed to side with Isabel. Could feel their disapproval even when they weren't speaking. Realized I was completely outnumbered. Felt like I was speaking a foreign language. Everything I said was being twisted or dismissed. Tried one more time to make them understand. Described Leo's pain in more detail. Explained how the lie had destroyed not just his trust, but his entire sense of reality. Asked them to imagine how they'd feel in his position. Pointed out that the truth would have been better than the devastating lie. Isabel accused me of prioritizing men's feelings over women's autonomy. Said I was falling into the trap of seeing women as naturally deceptive. Claimed that supporting mandatory testing was supporting a police state for women. Insisted that the rare cases of paternity fraud didn't justify systematic mistrust. Refused to acknowledge Leo's suffering as legitimate. Brooklyn was gentler, but equally firm. Kept saying that exceptional cases shouldn't drive policy. Argued that most relationships were based on honesty. Worried that mandatory testing would normalize suspicion. Said she was disappointed that I'd let one bad experience change my core beliefs. Couldn't seem to grasp that maybe my core beliefs had been wrong. Conversation got more heated as it went on. Voices were raised. Other coffee shop patrons were staring. Isabel accused me of being just another pick-me girl. Said I was seeking male validation by attacking women. Claimed I'd been corrupted by spending time with men like Leo. Insisted that true feminists would never support such measures. Finally snapped and told them they were being ideologically rigid. Said they cared more about their theories than about real people's pain. Pointed out that they were dismissing male suffering just because it was male. Argued that true equality meant caring about everyone's well-being. Asked why protecting men from fraud was somehow anti-feminist. That was apparently the final straw. Isabel stood up and declared the conversation over. Said I was no longer welcome in the group if I held these views. Accused me of having internalized the enemy. Claimed I was spreading dangerous propaganda. Gathered her things and walked out. Brooklyn lingered for a moment, looking torn. Said she still cared about me as a friend, but couldn't support my new position. Thought I was making a mistake that I'd regret. Hoped I'd come to my senses eventually. Then she left too, followed by the others. Sat there alone in the coffee shop, surrounded by empty chairs. Felt completely isolated, but also strangely liberated. Realized that my old friend group valued ideology over empathy. Understood that they were more committed to their beliefs than to truth. Saw clearly that they'd rather maintain their worldview than help real victims. The next few months were difficult and lonely. Lost most of my college friend group over this issue. Found myself questioning many other beliefs I'd held. Started reading perspectives I'd previously dismissed. Began to see the complexity in issues I'd thought were simple. Leo and I became closer friends during this period. He was grateful to have someone who understood what he'd gone through. Said it meant everything to have his experience validated. Told me that most people either blamed him for testing or minimized his pain. Appreciated that I'd been willing to change my mind based on evidence. Started connecting with other people who'd had similar experiences. Found online communities of men who'd been victims of paternity fraud. Heard story after story of lives destroyed by lies. Realized this wasn't as rare as I'd been told. Understood that the statistics might be skewed because many men never test. Met women who supported mandatory testing too. Mothers who said they'd welcome it because they had nothing to hide. Wives who thought it would protect faithful women from false accusations. Daughters who'd seen their fathers destroyed by paternity fraud. Realized that this wasn't just a men's issue. Began writing more about these experiences. Blog posts about the need for systematic change. Arguments for mandatory testing at birth. Discussions of how lies hurt everyone involved. Responses to feminist criticism of my position. Work gained a following among people who'd been through similar situations. Attracted criticism from my former ideological allies, too. Isabel would occasionally comment on posts, attempting to shame me. Brooklyn would send private messages expressing concern. Felt sad about the lost friendships, but couldn't regret speaking truth. Relationship with Scarlett became complicated after the breakup. She tried to maintain that she'd made an honest mistake, claimed she hadn't known for certain who the father was. Said she'd hoped it was Leo's because she loved him. Couldn't understand why I was taking his side. Eventually had to cut contact with her as well. Couldn't maintain a friendship with someone who'd caused such devastation. Realized that her lies had hurt not just Leo, but the innocent child. Understood that enabling dishonesty wasn't compassionate. Saw that real friendships sometimes required taking difficult stands. Started thinking about broader implications of my experience. Wondered how many other relationships were built on similar lies. Considered how much suffering could be prevented by systematic testing. Realized that mandatory paternity tests could eliminate this entire category of trauma. Began advocating for policy changes. Wrote letters to legislators about changing birth registration laws. Participated in online discussions about family court reform. Supported organizations working on fathers' rights issues. Contributed to research on the prevalence of paternity fraud. Used my platform to amplify other voices with similar experiences. Slowly built new friendships with people who valued truth over ideology. Found communities of people who'd questioned their previous beliefs. Connected with others who'd been ostracized for changing their minds. Discovered that intellectual honesty was more important than social conformity. Learned to value authentic relationships over superficial agreement. Leo eventually started dating again, though it took him over a year. Said he was upfront about wanting paternity testing in any future relationship. Found that honest women appreciated his transparency. Realized that the right person would understand his need for certainty. Seems happier now than he'd been even before the betrayal. Looking back, can see how naive my old beliefs were. Understand now that good intentions aren't enough. Recognize that ideology without empathy becomes cruelty. Realize that protecting some people sometimes requires disappointing others. Know that truth is more important than maintaining comfortable illusions. Feminism to me now means actual equality, not special treatment. Includes caring about men's well-being alongside women's rights. Involves fighting against injustice regardless of the victim's gender. Encompasses protecting everyone from fraud and deception. Recognizes that discrimination hurts people of all backgrounds. Mandatory paternity testing seems obviously correct to me now. Children deserve accurate medical histories and family information. Men deserve protection from being deceived about parentage. Honest women shouldn't have to live under clouds of suspicion. Devastating revelations like Leo's could be completely prevented. Old friends think I've been brainwashed or corrupted somehow. Isabel occasionally posts about former feminists who betrayed the cause. Brooklyn sometimes reaches out to ask if I'm ready to come back. They can't seem to understand that I didn't abandon my principles. I refined them based on new evidence and experiences. Process of changing my mind was painful, but ultimately liberating. Learned that growth sometimes requires admitting you were wrong. Discovered that real strength comes from facing uncomfortable truths. Understood that genuine compassion includes caring about everyone's suffering. Realized that intellectual honesty is worth temporary social isolation. Wouldn't go back to my old beliefs, even if it meant regaining those friendships. Value the authentic relationships I've built since then. Appreciate friends who challenge my thinking rather than just agreeing. Prefer difficult truths to comfortable lies. Know that real progress requires questioning everything. Left them sitting there, still shouting about the patriarchy. Realized my perfect bubble was built on a lie. My worldview is shattered. My friends are gone. And for the first time, I finally feel free. And very, very alone.